We've got Nate here today. Nate, I'll say, is not an engineer, I guess, in the traditional sense, but we've worked together. And anyway, Nate, why don't you introduce yourself here?
Yeah, so I'm Nate Strong. I am not a traditional engineer in the traditional sense of the word, but I do know databases. Really good SQL ninja right here. But basically, I am the CEO and founder of a company called Strong CRM, which happens to have something to do with my name. And we do revenue operations consulting. So what that means is we'll build a strategy for building an efficient revenue team, as well as build the technology and systems and the analytics and reporting and forecasting on the back end to make sure that you can have a successful revenue team. So basically what that all means boiled down is you want to grow your company. I can help you build the systems and the structures to make sure that you do that the right way. That's what I do, which is definitely not in the traditional sense of the word engineering, but there is a lot of engineering because I do a lot of like Salesforce programming and, setup and administration and stuff like that, which is a lot of fun.
Sales work is just social engineering, right, Nate? So
there it is.
So also to add a little bit there, you're definitely used to working with software engineers. You and I and Abelino have worked together a lot there. And so you came from basically a background in selling to startups, selling to enterprises, selling software solutions. So from what Abelino and I typically do on the actual programming end, you've been involved at the front of that pipeline. So actually getting those clients in, getting those cool engineering projects through the door so that folks like Abelino and I actually have something to work on. One of the interesting things that I've kind of learned going through that process too is as an engineer who's kind of in the trenches writing code all day, it doesn't just have to be about writing code. And there's more to that career track, more to the work that you can actually do than just number one, just writing code and going on the individual contributor route of being like a subject matter expert. And there's also more to it than going the engineering management route and working your way up the chain that way. And so like what you and I were involved in was basically, well, you were VP of sales. So you were running the sales department and I was a solutions engineer working with you from the technical side. So that's one of those other pathways I thought I'd point out that maybe a lot of folks typically don't think about from the engineering side. That's a cool pathway to go. And that's more working with folks like you and the teams that you've run and actually having that partnership between engineering and sales. And at least one of the cool things I've found from it is having more of a choice and more of a say in those projects that you get to work on as an engineer. So that was really cool.
Very true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I may, I mean, one of the reasons why it was always fun to work with you, Alex, is I think we had and continue to have a mutual respect for the work that each other does. And that was really fun. And I think that's what I really enjoyed. And it seemed like it's what you really enjoyed, seeing a bit of the other side of the house, if you will. Right. And maybe I'm speaking for you, but that's what I always enjoy about working with engineers is I get to see how's the sausage made? How does it actually work? And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of those really good points too, is especially from kind of the traditional engineering culture, it can kind of feel like engineering versus sales. Sometimes literally it is that in companies. I'm sure you've probably felt that on the other side too. And that's been one of the really cool things working with you or in generics is that really good like engineering and sales partnership is it's not one side versus the other. It's when you work together, it kind of like what I was saying before, like you can actually find the projects that are cool, the clients that are cool to work with, the things that you actually want to do as an engineer, the things you want to do as a company. You can really have a lot of fun working together, like shaping that direction, that the company's headed, the types of projects and experience you're getting and stuff like that. And you get a closer connection with the clients as well. Like you're in there in one of those early touch points, several of those early touch points in reality. Really like those stakeholders that are hiring you are getting to know you as the engineer. And that's something that sometimes there's not a lot of exposure to. I mean, a handful of folks, especially like in product companies, especially too, like you might be behind layers of customer service and product managers and all this other kind of stuff. And by the time a user requirement actually gets to you, you're so distanced from it that might not have any connection or like care at all about like who really cares what the user thinks, because I'm like 3 jumps away from that actual user. Like I have no idea what they're thinking. And that's one of those cool things of like actually being able to sit down and like have work sessions with those stakeholders, actually, going out and having lunch or dinner with those folks and just, brainstorming ideas with them, getting to know them better and having that connection, and also builds up that trust. So especially another one of those things that can be frustrating from the engineering side is like, oh, it feels like nobody's listening to me in the company. If I throw an idea out there, it seems like folks don't want to do it, or it just never gets done, or it just kind of gets lost wherever. This is one of those things that can help change that. This is one of those things where, if folks get to know you early on, you start having more of a voice, and it's kind of cool.
Well, and I'll say 2 things. Number 1, I've always had good relationships with engineers in my career, and I've always valued those, right? And what's interesting is those relationships have usually produced the best deals that I've ever closed. Like I remember my first very large deal that I ever closed with a very large software company. And it all started with a conversation that an engineer, he and I were just chatting it up. And I was like, hey, let's go over to the other side of a big body of water here in the Seattle area and go talk to this software company. And he and I went over and hung out and chatted with them and came up with an idea that we then sold to them. And it was all because he and I put our heads together and we're like, well, I said, well, this is their business strategy. And he said, well, this is the engineering information that I have from the data that we have. And we said, cool, well, let's combine that together and build an overall strategy for them. And I realized the power of working with the engineering team and why it's important. And I don't know if that's very typical of salespeople to want to do that, but I've always found that I appreciate that. And I think like my love for databases gives me a little bit of street cred, just a touch, but also an appreciation for the work that you all do to actually get that data into the hands of people. And then my second thing that I would say about it is not only is being an engineer who understands sales, like gives you a say, but what it does is like, it really gives you a promotion path in a lot of ways, because ultimately, the people at the top levels of an organization have to be relatively good salespeople at some point in their career, whether or not you're a CTO or a CEO or a CIO or whatever. The top CTO of large corporations is largely doing a lot of selling, whether or not it's actually selling to specific customers or if it's selling broadly through PR. But it's not a lot of doing, it's more a lot of understanding the actual sales and business process. So there's a career reason beyond just, that's a really good reason of saying, hey, I want to be involved in the decision-making process of what deals come in. That's absolutely true. But I would also say above that, if you want to keep rising and go even higher than engineering management into, C-level leadership, there's an understanding of other departments and an understanding of sales that if you understand that and have been through that process, it's really going to help you in the long run. So I don't know if that was your point there, Alex, but I'll just throw that out there while we're talking about it.
That is such a great point. And that even gets me thinking in the other direction too, especially like when you say PR, my mind goes straight to pull request instead of public relations.
Yeah.
But when you say that, the other thing that I realize is some things that kind of engineers take for granted. I've worked with teams of engineers who have been like really, really resistant and avoidant to anything that is just to like sales principles in general, anything that when you say sales, they just kind of like recoil at it. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I think gets overlooked there from folks that I've heard who kind of have that mentality is that even among engineers, you're selling your ideas to other folks. Every time, if you're working with a team, you're convincing them of ideas, like this idea is right. This architecture is a way to go, that, this, even just getting your pull request merged is a great example. You might be on one of those teams where sometimes you have a whole lot of comments to go back and you get blocked and your PR gets rejected a couple times. And that's another one of those cases where if you reframe how you're looking at that, it's like, I've seen a lot of people get really discouraged and they go, oh man, I got 2 rejections on it and have to go back and fix these things. And then I have to go back and fix this stuff in the second round. I see that where like they start taking that and directing it outward, like, oh, the reviewer is, is giving me a really hard time. Oh, the team lead is just giving me a really hard time on this. But if you flip that internally and you start bringing sales into that equation, you can start looking at it as, how have I not convinced this person doing this review, or these people doing the review, that I've actually got the correct approach here. So it can really apply even just like in those engineering circles as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, and I obviously Abelino gonna want to give you a chance to say some things. But
Alex stole my thoughts there. I was going to bring up the exact same thing.
I think that's a huge deal. And understanding, it's that back to that mutual respect thing that Alex and I, we experienced, the understanding that from the engineering side, that somebody's got to make revenue. Like you got to have revenue to actually have a business. So there's like an understanding there, and it takes salespeople to do that thing. But also from the sales side, understanding that when you say, oh, engineers recoil at salespeople, well, salespeople recoil at salespeople, right? It's, a few people who maybe give us a bad name because, they sell snake oil, right? Or whatever, pick your poison, if you will. It's easy to harp on salespeople, and I totally get it. And sometimes I've been guilty of this. You oversell because you got to hit a goal and everything like that. But I think that just like on the engineering side, and this is what we have to realize on our side, that you have to understand that somebody's got to make revenue, and you're selling yourself, even if you're not selling a deal, you're actually selling your own pull request, for example. But on our side, what we've got to understand is that we have to be honest, right? And it's funny, I was just talking to a friend. We were talking about values because I'm setting up values in my new company. And he was like, one of my values is never lie. And I was like, well, that's an interesting value for a salesperson, right? And he's like, yeah, but I totally believe it in my life. And here's why. And I said, that's great. I think that might make it to one of my top 5 values, is like, never lie, right? And it's a huge thing to understand that, it's so easy to like stretch the truth or whatever in sales. And that's where we get the bad rap, but it never helps you in the long run. And if you think about the long run and you think about these relationships that you have with engineers and everything, you always want to keep to the absolute truth and make sure that you're working on that and focus on the relationship and not on like selling snake oil, basically. Both sides have to figure out how to like work together in a good way. And, it's the engineers understanding that, I have to sell all the time, because even if I'm not selling, I'm selling my pull request. And also revenue, we need revenue for business. And then it's the salespeople understanding, hey, there's a reason why we have this reputation. And it's usually around us overselling and, going crazy and saying something crazy. And we just have to all say, okay, let's bring it down a notch and be okay with each other and understand that there's a reason for all these things, and then figure out how to get along in the middle there. So anyways, that's my like longing. Well, thank you for coming to my TED Talk there. So,
Yeah. And no, that's a different series.
Right.
So you hit on something like interesting there too, which sometimes salespeople don't even like salespeople. And I think there's a thing to remember there where at the end of the day, everybody is just a person. It doesn't matter like what role you're in, what you're doing. And because of that, just certain people are not going to like certain other people. It's just a thing.
Yep.
It's interesting that you mentioned that kind of challenge as well, because from the engineering side, we can kind of see it as like, you could sell ice cream to Eskimos because you're so good. But when you really look at it, it's like there are people and companies and stuff like that out there that like you're just not going to click with. It's not only a normal thing, but in some cases, like it can actually be a good thing. So like when you're building out your target market and who you're actually selling to, who does your business actually help? Like, who are your customers? There's a group of people in there that need to not be your customers.
Correct.
And so it can kind of play into that of kind of like a litmus test of if you're just not clicking well with somebody, like maybe there's not a good fit for what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is I personally have been on a journey, personally, of like, when I started out my career, I was like, no sales, I don't want to be in sales. And then I was in account management, and then all of a sudden realized that I was in sales even though I was in account management. And then I started doing marketing. And then I was like, oh, now I actually want to run a sales team. So then I ran a sales team, and then I ran another sales team. I've come out the other end with a high degree of respect for salespeople. For example, one group of people that I have a huge amount of respect for is cold callers, which I know everybody on this call is like, oh, right. But you think about their job, right? That they're required to do. First of all, it's usually an entry-level job. So they're just trying to make it. And most people that are hired as cold callers, actually pretty much everybody that are hired as cold callers is like, I want to break into tech. I want to get into tech. And I'm like, well, here's your shot. Let's go. Make 60 calls a day. And they're like, all right, let's go. And I'm like, I can't believe that you want to go and do that, but cool, right? It's not a fun job. And it's a lot of rejection. And literally the metrics that I look at is if you call a lead 3 times, 2% of them answering the phone and scheduling a meeting. 2%. That means that 80% of the time you're getting a no. Right? Whether it's they don't call you back or they're saying, they're swearing at you on the phone. So even though most of the calls that I get on my phone, I just say silence them, right? Occasionally I answer the phone and I try to, not always the best at it, but I try to if they're an SDR who's trying to actually do cold calling, entertain them for, 2 minutes and actually talk to them. And if they have something to sell me that I'm interested in, I'll listen to them and schedule the demo. And if they don't, I'll say, hey, no, thanks. I'm not interested in this. This isn't going to help me, and move on. And that's totally fine. But I have a high amount of respect for them after this journey of being no sales, because it is actually a hard job. And it's a job that unfortunately somebody's got to do. Right. And just because we don't love always getting cold calls, what you realize though is I have learned about very interesting technologies by getting cold calls from salespeople, right? And so that helps me out because then I actually learn about something new that I'm like, oh, I didn't know about this. And this might actually help my business. So you have to think about it as a connection piece. So anyways, but totally agree with you. Most of the oh, I don't like that salesperson is probably just, you probably don't get along with that person, right? You're right. And it's less about their job and more about just hey, some people just don't get along, and pick your target market, pick your target people, pick your values and go with them and work with the people who share those values and share that target market.
Yeah. You mentioned something really interesting here with the cold calling too. And that unrepressed some memories of when I have done cold calling on several occasions. I was in a side of retail where it was more hands-on, white glove, whatever, not cashiering stuff. It was more actual sales. And you have to cold call doing that. And then also real estate for a little bit. And you have to cold call doing that. A lot of cold calling. And I did that obviously at this point before I got into professionally programming. I'd been programming as a hobby for a very long time, but I did some other stuff before actually working my way up to it as a career. And as I'm as you say that, and as I'm looking back, kind of thinking at it, I think that was one of those really helpful skills that helped with persistence. And don't get me wrong, rejection always sucks, but you kind of develop a skin for it or a shell for it, right?
Right.
That's one of those things that I see kind of going into the engineering side is some folks can be so defensive or take it so personally when anyone makes a critique on their work, even just going back to the pull request example, just leaving a pull request comment can feel like the end of the world to somebody. And that makes me wonder, maybe not necessarily doing 60 calls a day, but are there some of those cases where doing those practices from the sales side, doing things that get you out there and push your social comfort zone and your fear of rejection and your level of persistence with engaging people socially and stuff like that? Are there those types of things there that not only apply to sales, but you can also take back on the engineering side, and like you says, with your peers on your team on a regular basis?
Right. Yeah. Well, so first of all, I'll tell a story from somebody that I used to work with who's an engineer, and the most engineering of engineers, if you know what I mean, right? Very engineering, right?
So more so than me, that says a lot.
Yeah. I'd say Alex, but more, right? And I will say this guy was not great on the phone with clients. Right. When I first met him, he tells me a story. He's like, by the way, do you know that I did door-to-door book sales? And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, I did door-to-door book sales. It was in college and I ended up at the end of the summer and had made $300 for the whole summer. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, Not the best experience, but totally get it. And we got on this call with this customer, and it was a disaster, basically, right? Pulled him aside at the end, and I said, "Hey, buddy, like, do. Here's the things that you need to improve on." Okay, cool. Next call, those things were changed. Still not as good, but better. And then I was like, okay, but here's the things that need to change. And over again. And here's the deal about him. Started out not great, but ended up, I wanted to bring him to sales calls all the time. And here's why, is because he had been used to the rejection of door-to-door book sales. And then over time, worked on getting to a place where he was really, really good. And I was so impressed with the work that he did, and he's a fantastic engineer. And so anyways, I remember seeing that happen, and I was like, there's the guy who's dealt with rejection and has improved over time and has become really, really good because they're able to take that feedback. And I wasn't trying to be harsh, but it was just like he wanted the feedback, and so he took it. So that's the story that I would say that comes back to your piece. But then I would also say, in terms of learning things in the sales side that come back to the engineering side. Well, the biggest thing besides the rejection piece, which is super helpful actually, by the way, and learning how to take good feedback and understanding that it's not usually not personal. It's like, we want to improve you or whatever. And in sales, it's usually not personal. It's just like, hey, the budget didn't work out or whatever. And you use it as an opportunity to improve, right, yourself. The second piece is sales is an opportunity for you on the engineering team to interact with the customer. The first thing is, it's usually, especially if you work at an enterprise sales organization, it's an opportunity for you to get to know the customer, which is what I love. I love flying to see the customer, taking them out to dinner, hanging out with them. But not just because I want a schmancy dinner. It's because I actually enjoy the time. And Alex has seen me energized at 2 a.m. in the morning because I was like, that was so awesome. We had so much fun with that client. They're so cool. And that is the level that you can get to and get that relationship with the client. Then it's easy for you to have the harder conversations, honestly, with the client, which is what you want. You want to build that relationship so it's easy to have the conversations. But it also gives you a perspective you wouldn't normally have because you're seeing the client in different contexts. Yes, in the sales context, maybe in the taking them out to dinner context, if you're lucky enough to go do that, or maybe in the scoping context or the negotiation context. You actually get a deeper relationship and understanding of the client. And even if you're not at an enterprise sales organization, like a transactional organization, but you're getting a holistic picture of who you're trying to serve. And that will honestly make your code better, because let's say you're not an enterprise sales organization, you're a SaaS organization that charges $100 a month for each piece of software, but you get to hang out with clients and you get to understand more about the client. They will tell you things about their situation and what their pain points are that are going to make you realize, oh, maybe I should write this code this way because that affects what they're doing. And I'm not even talking product. I'm saying oh, you care about the reliability of the API integration between Salesforce and Marketo, right? Or, our software and Salesforce, right? I'm just using my own background because that affects, that reliability or that timing or that, the fact that it fails X number of times because of these types of things affects me. You'll start to have that understanding, not because they told you that, but because you start to understand their world. Right. So you get a deeper and fuller perspective of their world. And then I'll also give you that it also gives you the ability to understand how to sell your own code. And ultimately you are selling yourself and selling your own code, whether or not you want to admit that.
I think these are some amazing gold nuggets here, especially for being in a team, which means getting to know your team members and learning how they work and think so that you can work effectively with them. Everything that you just went through and described, in my mind, I'm like, whoa, I could actually apply that today with my team members and learn how to effectively work with them instead of bumping heads.
Yeah.
There's another important thing to know here too when it comes to which type of engineer you are on that team. And on one side, you can be the engineer that Nate talked about, and you can have that interaction with the client. You can have the client also opens the door to have direct interactions with the users, because that's part of a research phase and that you can be a part of as well. And that can really help you, just like what Nate was saying, actually understand what do your stakeholders want, what do your users want. And then you can start piecing together in your mind what technology actually helps solve these problems the best based on the way they were explained. Like your product manager does not know everything. Depending on your product manager, don't actually tell them that. What your product manager doesn't know that you're responsible for on the engineering side is the technical stuff, the tech implementations, the best tools, the best ways to do things, to implement things. So if you've got that connection with the client, with the users, and you can start hearing those things firsthand, there are so many less steps in that telephone game from the requirements getting from where they were generated back up to you, that you can understand the problems a lot better. The other thing, kind of on the side of what Abelino was saying, is I know I've definitely been on some teams, and I think on some of those teams I've been this person as well, that has not had that connection. And how do I say, like, making up requirements which might not be right. You start making those up as an engineer, going, oh, well, users need magic links because those are the best user experience, and that's what everyone wants. And it's like, no, I talked to the client and they don't care about that at all. Like, we have to integrate with their LDAP system because they have an enterprise login, and nobody uses magic links because their IT department has their email locked down, so they can't get to them anyway. Mm-hmm. So yeah, when you've got those touch points and those connections directly with the people who are stakeholders, who are users, you can get such a better idea of what you should actually be building. Yeah, it's such a great...
Man, I've never heard engineers gush so much about sales, but anyway, no, I'm just kidding.
We're deleting this part, so don't worry.
Oh yeah, you just edit it out.
That's right. The other thing you touched on that I think there's a really important distinction behind is that sales improvement story. There's a misconception, I think, among a handful of engineers that sales is a talent rather than a learned skill. And so, yes, different people can kind of be in different levels of that curve based on their experiences in life and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, one of the things that at least makes sales click with me are the processes in it. Like, there are steps to sales. There are mechanical elements of it. There are things you do and things you don't do, and times you do stuff and times you don't do stuff. And I'm kind of picturing now like these if-then branches in my head, and kind of when do you do this? When do you, it's a formula. Exactly, Abelino. And I think that's one of those things where if engineers haven't had exposure to that side, to formal sales training, it can look like somebody's just naturally good at it. The other side of that is, and it'll never apply to me. I could never be good at it because I didn't have the talent to do it. And I'm so far into my career right now that I just kind of, I do my own thing and they do their thing and whatever. But what you really said there is important, is it is something you can learn. It's something that you can start out being the worst salesperson ever, but there's a curve you can get over and you can significantly improve at it. And at that point, then it's a matter of just how much effort do you want to put into it? And then there's a certain amount of any learning aspect of who are you learning from? So, if you're really interested in it, find some good folks to learn from, because that'll help too. And like you and me, Nate, like it also really helps to find somebody that you really enjoy working with.
Yes.
Because that makes the process so much more fun.
Totally. So Alex and I live in the Seattle area. Abelino, you live in San Diego, right? So you've never heard of snow. That doesn't exist down there, right?
No,
so
I theoretically love it, but haven't actually experienced it like you guys.
Yeah, right. Well, so here's the thing. So I actually lived in New England for 3 years because my wife was in residency in northern New England, in Maine, right? It's cold up there. And so when it comes to snow, like, I've seen a lot of it. I'm kind of okay. So what happens though, every time it snows a lot in the mountains here. but every time it snows in Seattle, there's two things that happen. It's like a heartbeat. It's like there's the lub and the dub. And the lub is snows in Seattle, the city shuts down, and there's always this immediate lub reaction of, oh my gosh, Seattle people can't drive in the snow, right? It's like this, nobody in Seattle could drive in the snow. It's terrible, blah, 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 blah. And then there's the dub just afterwards. It just follows. And it's this reaction to that, which goes, no, it's not the Seattle drivers. I've lived in New England, and it's because we don't clear the roads here, and we have no snowplows, and it's not anything about the drivers. It's about the fact that we don't clear the roads. And let me tell you, it's both. Seattle people are terrible at driving in snow. They don't put on snow tires. They do stupid things. Hey, I'm going to drive up a really steep hill, and then they slide down. Or the people who think they're super outback can do anything and can go up an 18% grade hill with ice on it in all season tires. And then the fact that there's 18 plows that the city owns. So you got both problems. Okay.
My outback is amazing, Nate.
Why do I tell this story? I'm going to get to the point. It's just like when I was in college, when I was in a humanities class, the professor would always say, well, this is actually a science. And then whenever I was in a science class, they would say, well, this is where it's an art. Biology is an art. No, it's both. It's both for everything. And this all comes back to sales and engineering. What you're saying is because sales is both a science and an art. And that's the beauty of it. But so is engineering. Right?
Absolutely.
It's a science and an art. If it was just if A plus B, then it would be honestly relatively easy to do engineering. And, you can find some engineers that write code and they just do here's how it's A plus B. But we all know that it's more than that. The good engineers are critical thinkers. They understand a lot more about the world. They gather all this information and then they write really beautiful code. Same deal with salespeople. It's the exact same thing. You can follow a process. You're also a critical thinker, and you also understand the art behind sales. So all that story about the Seattle snow and college and all that to say that sales and engineering are both an art and a science. And that's the beauty of both of them. It's just you have to figure out where the art fits and where the science fits. And you bring up a really good point, Alex. The whole, is sales innate or is it learned? And I would argue that it's like there's some innate tendencies. It's not one or the other. Like you just come out of the gate confident and sound really right. But you can learn all that. I do believe that anybody can learn how to sell. And there is a formula, and you and I have seen this, and I would be like, Alex, you got to give me this number because I got to make this call tomorrow because it's got to happen tomorrow. Or you got to give me 3 options so that I can present 3 options. And there's a formula to this. So there's the science and the art, but all that can be learned if you want to learn it.
Yeah. And to that point too, just because you dip a toe in the waters of sales doesn't mean you have to stop being an engineer. It's just one more skill, one more tool in your toolbox.
Right. It's like, I wouldn't, maybe I'm going to totally throw people under the bus, but it's like, I know Python and now I'm going to learn Elixir and then I'm going to learn sales. I would see it that way. It's another skill and it's going to only reinforce and bring more understanding to your world by adding that on. That's a piece of your knowledge that reinforces your ability to be a better engineer overall. But it doesn't make you not an engineer. It just means that you know other things that help you out in your career and your life. So
you're 100% correct. And it's those social skills that reinforce everything. And just getting stronger with your social skills is just an amazing thing to have in your framework of working.
So I guess also to throw the loaded question out there, because I've not only heard this, but also, experienced it as well. Is sales only a game for extroverts?
I don't think so. The traditional definition of extrovert is where you get your energy, right? Do you get your energy from being around people or being alone? What I look for in salespeople when I hire them, that has nothing to do with where they get their energy. I really look at, are you good on the phone? Do you have a history of being able to produce results? But if you're an engineer and you're becoming a solution engineer, then you usually have that history. And then the other thing that I look for is, do you have a drive to succeed and be in sales? And honestly, are you driven by winning and driven by commission payments and money and stuff like that? Are the things that are going to drive you going to help you out. And that's what I look for. And I think that has very little to do with extroversion, right? It's what are you driven by? Are you driven by succeeding in your career in this way? Are you driven by like, there's a rush when you close a deal? I feel it. Do you like that? Right. And then are you good on the phone? And I guess people could say is that, are you good on the phone, the extrovert thing, but it really has nothing to do with introvert and extrovert. It's just, are you able to create a relationship? Are you able to tell stories instead of facts? Are you able to capture an audience? That doesn't need to, you don't need to be an extrovert to do that. It's all about, do you want to just adjust yourself a little bit to make sure that you can actually have those qualities? So.
There's probably a whole episode in stories versus facts. There's books on that one. I can't think of a good one that comes to the top of my mind. Does anyone come to the top of your mind?
I don't actually know, but I actually learned that when I was in college and I did like tours of the campus freshman and sophomore year. And they told us when they trained us, they were like, look, don't tell facts. When you get to a building, tell a story, because everybody remembers stories. Nobody remembers facts. That was ingrained in me. So I don't actually know what book that's from, but it seemed to work.
Yeah. The other thing there that stuck with me was, are you getting excited about what you're doing? And that kind of comes back to like, why do you do what you do? Do you love the work that you're doing? Do you love the company that you're working at? And those kind of things, I think when they resonate with you, when they click with you as an engineer, those can be another one of those good reasons to get out there and work on the sales side of things as well, because you're helping to further the thing that you actually believe in. And that can be a really good motivating factor right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they say don't sell for a company that you don't believe in because you won't be a good salesperson. And that's very true. But I would say don't work for a company that you don't believe in, right? Because ultimately, as an employee of any company, you're going to have to, like, even if friends ask you, where do you work? I work at Strong CRM. This is what I do. And if you sound bored by it or annoyed by it or whatever, then people are going to be like, why do you work there? Right. So I think regardless of what you're doing, being passionate about what you're doing is always helpful. But then that's a good point. It's less about extroversion and it's more about the passion that you take to your work. And if you are passionate about something, you will come alive. People see it, right? They see when you come alive about something because they're like, oh, you're super passionate about that. And just let yourself show that. And that's all it takes in a lot of ways. So, and being good at the process. Being good at follow-up and process. Most deals are won through persistence anyways, and being quick on the phone. So
is that the big secret? At the end of all this, the takeaway is just wear them down. At some point, everyone's got their limit. Just wear them down. You're good. You'll get the deal.
So thank you for the Tom Haverford quote. If you don't understand the Parks and Rec reference, please go watch it and rewatching it. So here's the thing. I've realized this because I just closed a few deals this week, but they didn't get done by me sending out an SOW and saying, what do you think? They got done through me being persistent. And it wasn't because I wore them down. They needed what I was offering. But if I didn't follow up with this legal team to make sure that we get the contract details sorted out, it's nothing against them and it's nothing against, me. It's just people are busy. They've got a lot of priorities. And this is one of those priorities. And part of you as a salesperson is connecting all those dots and saying, hey, I need to get to legal. I need to get to this person. I need to get to the finance person. I need to get to the decision maker. And get all them together, and I need to make sure they all agree on this contract. And by the way, contracts are complicated, right? Especially for enterprise deals like the stuff that I sell. They're very, very complicated. So a lot of people have a lot of opinions. So you basically have to see yourself as a project manager. One of my former bosses told me this. He's like, you have to be the project manager to close this. And honestly, a project manager is often the person bugging everybody like, did you get your stuff done? And that's basically what I'm doing as a salesperson is you're saying, hey, is this legal document ready for me? Hey, did you talk to your boss about this budget? It's not about wearing people down, but it's more about just being front and center and saying, hey, you said this was a priority. Let's make sure that it still is. And as long as you're not annoying and as long as you're not aggressive and as long as you're not problematic, I see myself as being a resource to them of being like, no, you need this. I'll give you one example. And, I don't want to go too far. Am I okay to give one example here?
We need to shut down your example time now, Nate.
Okay. All right.
How did you not sell me out of that one right there?
I'm selling this example. It's a good example.
There we go. Okay. One example.
One example. I'm potentially working with one client that is losing revenue. When a company is declining in revenue, they automatically turn inward and it's a power grab, right? Well, this is my thing because that's all they have left. And what I'm trying to do with this company is basically shine the light on the fact that like, hey, if you all don't get out of your own way, you will cease to exist as a company because like we all see the graphs and it's not up and to the right, it's down to the right. And it's me trying to get with all the stakeholders all throughout the company and say, hey, look at the revenue. We need to improve this process. We clearly need to improve it. Yes, I know you don't want to give up your power, but we need to improve this process. That is very clear. And that is something that is tough. And it's a lot of relationship, but that's what a good salesperson does. That's my example. All right, we'll shut down my example.
You've touched on two really good points there too, that I think engineers can take and internalize as well that can apply and cross over there. And one of those was persistence and basically follow up. And just the act of checking back in on something can bring it back into somebody's mind, make it relevant again. And especially professionally, folks are so busy these days that things get dropped all the time. Sometimes what might be perceived as rejection, especially from an engineer's perspective, might actually just be that person legitimately forgot. And the reason why the thing's not moving forward or you're not getting what you want or whatever is just because you need to go and have another reminder, like have another chat with them, follow back up on it and see, hey, what's the status of this? What's going on with that? Did you have an opportunity to review what we talked about last week or whatever?
Absolutely. That's most of it. That's like 90% of it is like, you're just not the priority that you probably should be or once were. So you just got to follow up. And that goes internally as well as externally, right? Let's say you're asking for a raise and you're an engineer and your boss hasn't gotten back to you. It's probably not because they don't care. It's because they got to go actually do something and it takes work to do that. So you just got to follow up on that. Hey, did you check on that? Or even something small enough like, hey, did you get my pull request? Can you approve it? No? Okay, please approve, right? Something like that.
Yeah, that's actually a great example. I've run teams where I've heard from somebody that somebody else is angry about their pull request not going through yet, or they just, needed something from me to like sign off on it or whatever. It's like, oh, I thought they were still working on the other thing. They never left another comment in there. They never said they fixed the stuff that we chatted about like last week or whatever. I just had a million other things on my plate. I didn't know you were done with that thing.
Right.
Just let me know.
Right. Exactly. People are busy. It's not that they don't like you. It's just that you got to be top of their mind. And that's important. Yeah.
So, yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Hey there. If you've been enjoying this chat with Nate, we've split the next topic up into its own episode. So be sure to check back for that. Until then, we'll catch you next time on Full Stack Engineering.